it's funny how it can sneak up on you, because when you have a job, you do your job, right? But when you're doing something creative and it's something higher, then procrastination comes in. And why is that? I mean, you could work very well when there was somebody telling you what it was that you had to do. But when you yourself are telling yourself what you have to do, then suddenly, in general, it becomes much harder. And what I found was that there are what I call two types of procrastination. Like, there's the light side of procrastination. For example, there's the side where you have a deadline, and the deadline is imposed by somebody external. You have to hand in your project or whatever it is by a certain time. And so if you're at university, for example, I mean, you probably know from when you were writing university papers that this kind of procrastination would come in for a lot of people. I'm not saying for everybody, but the funny thing is that with the light side of procrastination, that when you get closer to the deadline, then it also becomes more urgent. And when it becomes more urgent, then I don't know if any of you saw this TED talk about procrastination, lessons from a master procrastinator. It's really, I would really recommend this TED talk, because it's very funny, and he talks about how much he procrastinated for the first, 300 days of his master's program, and then he spent, a couple of weeks writing his master's thesis, and, it was horrible. But the thing was, what he called the panic monster sets in. So you have the procrastination that and he calls that the immediate gratification monkey, which just is, having fun. And then you have the panic monster that comes in when the deadline approaches. You panic, and and this means that you actually take action, but unfortunately it's too late to do it completely properly, but you do it, and it's kind of cute. But then what I talk about in this book is that there's another side of procrastination, and that is the dark side of procrastination, where nobody sets a deadline for you. And the problem with that is that those are the more real things in life. I mean, those are the things like you have a person that you mean to reconnect with, for example, and you'll do it one day, but it will cause you some discomfort, because maybe the last time you talked with each other, you fell out or something like that. So you had to find a way, and you just keep putting it off, and then maybe they're no longer here, or they lose their memory or something like that. It's not possible anymore. Or maybe you had this project and now your life is in a different place and you can't do this project anymore, or your life actually ends, So this is the dark side of procrastination, because there is no need for the panic monster, because nobody actually is there externally telling you that you have to get on with it. People will tell you that you have to get on with other things, but those things that other people tell you to get on with, those things are actually things that are not for you, but for them. Usually it's that. So therefore, when you want to do something for yourself, you have to somehow be your own hard taskmaster. And I talk about different ways of doing this, different ways of leveraging this fear of the panic monster that doesn't show up in the dark side of procrastination. I talk about that in the book, and how to do that. But now, since there are different elements to this talk, one element is getting yourself to actually sit down and do that creative work that you wanted to work on. Another element is about how to do it, and and I would like to also later go, if we have the time, go through a couple of the methods.
People can stay.
Okay, but no Yeah, so what is often said about writers, about writing, is that, and this is about all types of creativity, but about writing, the typical thing that is said is that writers know that the hard part about writing is not the writing. The hard part is sitting down to write. Because you need to find the time, you need to find the state of mind in order to do it, and you need to make sure that when you sit down, you're not just online and like procrastinating, So you have to actually make sure that you do something every day. So that part about how to sit down and do the work that is meaningful to you, which is what I call the great work. That is covered in this book here, Conscious Living, and I'd like to read a short quote, which is from Robert Greene, which is what I start the chapter about stimulation with. And the thing is that stimulation is one of the things that will take you away from the great work, because stimulation is something that gives you a quick hit, and it's something that stimulates especially the dopamine receptors in your brain. And the dopamine is a neurotransmitter that is to do with meaning. So if you get artificial hits to the dopamine receptors, then somehow your brain is satisfied and you don't need to pursue meaning. And therefore you need to avoid this whilst you're working on something meaningful, because otherwise it'll just take away your time and it'll take away your motivation to do it. So of all the chapters in the book, I chose the chapter about stimulation to present to you because there's a very poignant quote at the beginning of the chapter, and it's from Robert Greene. Do you know Robert Greene? He's an American author who has written books like Mastery, The Laws of Human Nature. What else has he written? He's written The 48 Laws of Power. That was his most best-selling book. Anyway, but in Mastery, he talks about the need to focus. And so what he writes is the human that depended on focused attention for its survival now becomes the distracted scanning animal, unable to think in depth, yet unable to depend on instincts. Because with the way that our society has evolved with technology especially, we are inundated so much with information that we get this thing that we're just scanning all this information, and that takes, when we're in that scanning mode, it takes away from our ability to go in depth with one thing, and therefore it's important to find a time when the internet is turned off, when you're not being inundated by all sorts of stimulating messages or whatever it might be. So, I mean, I list different pitfalls here in the chapter about information. I mean, one thing, the most obvious thing is drugs, right? Because drugs that dull the mind, of course, generally will take you away from the feeling of being clear-headed and doing your writing or doing your creative work, doing your meaningful work. If you have a hangover, for example, it can be hard, despite what has been said about artists, because there is a kind of a myth that artists just live the bohemian life and then suddenly get struck by information and then it all comes. But what I found was that you need to go through quite a self-disciplining process in order to be able to create something great. So there was drugs, talk about that, and then there's information. So we talk about that, like all the information coming in through the internet, and this can be split into different stimulating categories. One of the ones is acute entertainment, for example, which is something that, for example, you get on the Facebook videos with the cute animals or children, stuff like that. It massively stimulates you, and it makes you laugh, and it makes you feel like you get a reward immediately, the kind of reward that that a parent would get when having a good moment with their child or with an animal that they're taking care of, etc. There's also Facebook wisdom, another category that I call, because, for example, on social media you will see a lot of very wise quotes, and these quotes are things like that the person who wrote that quote, who said it, he actually went through a whole lifetime of work and accumulating wisdom to come up with that quote. And so it's a very poignant quote, but the thing is that the way that it's served up and the way that you get it so easily, just it gives you a kind of a high, and then you kind of share it, but because of the way that it's served, and then you get distracted to something else, it doesn't really get the possibility to enter your being, and you don't get the time and the focus to really think about how that quote affects you in your life, because you're constantly moving on to something else, and because you've already just shared it, and then somehow in your mind it's like, yeah, I've done that, now to the next thing. So that again can take away from the focus. Of course, I have something else, maybe hard to pronounce. It's called pornography, which is also something that stimulates, and again, it's something that doesn't require any focus, any work, becoming a better person in order to and then being worthy of being with somebody who is at the level that you want to be with, because you get the images just served up in this stimulating flow of climaxes that again stimulates the dopamine receptors that give you the reward as if you've been doing a lot of work, but you haven't really, and it's again evaporates. And then at the end of it, there's the news, because after you've had all the stimulation, where the message of all this stimulation was that, well, you've already accomplished everything, so here's the reward, and you don't need to do anything. After that, there's the news that tells you about horrible things that are happening in the world, and many times the news tends to have this kind of panicky energy where, like, there are these horrible things happening, and it's so far removed that you can't do anything about it. So after you've got all this message about how you've already accomplished everything, then you get the message that, well, the world is totally messed up and you can't really do anything about it. And so there's this, if you think about how these different elements affect your state of mind, it becomes, well, to me it becomes quite clear that you need to insulate yourself from them in order to really go with focus into something deep and difficult that you're doing for yourself.